see it's on. When you are not adjusting, when you are done adjusting, you can turn it off. Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome, and thank you for coming to the mock trial event between the Bulverde, New Braunfels South, and Universal City Challenge B classes. My name is Heather Hickey, and I will be acting as the administrator for this event. I would like to introduce our jury to you. Today we have Shannon Dawson. Shannon, give a little wave. Hi. Linda Perkins and Aaron Palin. Yes? Okay. And also today we have attorney Megan Hartman, who is acting as our Honorable Judge Megan Hartman of State Court of Milton County. Yes. All right. So thank you very much, Judge and jurors, for giving your time to our students today. While the judge and jurors are getting settled, I'd like to take a moment to remind the audience of protocol. If you look in your little handout that was given to you, protocol states that from the time the bailiff opens the court to the retiring of the judge and jury, members of the audience, tutors, and guests should refrain from communicating with students or jurors in any way. There is to be no signaling, no whispering for the purpose of communicating with or prompting of students. Such communication can result in points, penalty points being assigned to the team. At the end of each round, at the end of each trial, there will be a 20-minute intermission, and we ask that during that 20-minute intermission, that protocol be upheld. There continue to be no discussion of the trials or anything like that between students, participating students, or family members or directors with the students or anything like that. So we are going to go ahead and begin with round one with the New Braunfels South team as prosecution and the Bulverde team as the defense in our mock trial of the state of South Carolina versus Barbara Allen Barrett. I'll go ahead and turn it over to the bailiff to begin the round.
Thank you, bailiff. Please be seated. At this time, I'll call the case of State versus South Carolina, versus Barbara Allen Barrett. What says the prosecution? Is prosecution ready to proceed? This is prosecution. I apologize. First round, there'll be a few of those. Is prosecution ready to proceed? Defense, are you ready to proceed? Do either side have any pretrial motions to be heard? Then at this time, I'll ask that the defendant rise. And are you going to enter a plea today? Thank you. You may be seated.
Excuse me. Please use the microphone when addressing the judge so that we can get you. Thank you.
Prosecution, are you ready to proceed with your opening statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Please do so.
May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is David Dunlap, and these are my co-counsels, Claire DeBoer, Sarah Thompson, and Lindsay Gould. A life has been taken. John Walker Barrett is dead. He was shot intentionally in the back of the skull, and we know his wife, Barbara, pulled the trigger as he ran away from her. She and the housekeeper were the only other ones in the house that night. All this is uncontested. Now, by some accounts, John was a terrible character. He was unfaithful to his wife, and he was prone to drinking. And when he drank, he was abusive. However, on the night of December 18th, 1988, at around 9, John came home from work sober and announces he wants to end his marriage. Barbara is angry and confronts him about a letter to a different woman, and an argument ensues. The couple retires to the dining room, where John is heard to remark that he still wants a divorce and is glad his wife finally knows his feelings for the other woman. Barbara and John exit the dining room and enter the living room. Barbara is heard to mutter that John will regret his actions. John sits on the couch as Barbara pours herself a drink to steady her nerves. Barbara gets her gun and shoots 6 times.
Your Honor, the counsel is testifying.
Overruled.
Crack. She hits the wall. Crack, back of the right leg, and then in his thigh. She pursues him. Crack, crack. 2 more rounds enter John's back, and he goes to the ground. And while John lays motionless and helpless on the floor, crack. A final, fatal shot to the back of his head. Barbara then drops the gun beside the corpse of her dead husband and runs to lock herself in the downstairs bathroom. Barbara may have been the victim of abuse. And after surviving the abuse and recovering, she could have persistently sought help from a qualified professional until she got the help she needed. She could have sought charges against John for his alleged abuse, or she could have pursued separation and divorce proceedings. There are many things she could have done. And if she had, John might still be alive and in the hands of the justice system for any crimes he may have committed. But Barbara was a woman scorned. She didn't want justice. Barbara wanted payback. After reading a letter John had penned of his desire to divorce her and remarry his fling, Barbara planned to murder him. What the defense wants to prove to you is that Barbara killed her husband because of psychological disorder known as battered woman syndrome. To support the claim, the defense will call on psychologist Dana McGuire, who will say that Barbara didn't leave her current scenario because she was not capable of a more sophisticated response than a lab animal. She will tell you that Barbara knew she was hurting John, but she didn't believe John would die as she shot him again and again. Members of the jury, today, the people will prove to you that the defendant killed her husband with malice aforethought. Barbara Barrett murdered John Barrett. Today you will hear from Officer Cheney, the first responder to the scene. he will say that he found Mr. Barrett's body covered in blood, 6 shots fired from the Smith & Wesson .38, and Mrs. Barrett barricaded in the downstairs bathroom. The Barrett's butler, Lee Porter, will say that he saw them fighting that night, heard the gunshots ring out, saw Mr. Barrett limping into the dining room, and ran from the house to call the police. But perhaps even more importantly, Mr. Porter will also say that the very same day of the murder, that afternoon in fact, after hearing gunshots in the backyard, he witnessed Mrs. Barrett coming into the house through a private back door, carrying the .38 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun. Mrs. Barrett practiced shooting the same day with the very same gun she would use to murder her husband that night. Today, this woman challenges the law. She took vengeance as she saw fit, no matter how terrible the abuse and marital unfaithfulness she may have endured. She knew what she was doing, and her actions did not bring about justice. They did not constitute justice. But vengeance is not justice. Today, you have the ability to serve justice. The power is in your hands. In this case, the people of the state of South Carolina will bring forth all testimony and evidence needed to ask you to find Barbara Barrett guilty of murder. Thank you.
Defense counsel, you may proceed with your opening.
Remain hopeful that we can live together in a with mutual respect and affection, enjoying happiness with one another. And even though our marriage vows acknowledge that there will be better and worse in our marriages, no one should have to endure the worst from the one they promised to love. However, as you see, this is exactly what my client endured from her husband. You'll hear from Mrs. Barrett's testimony that she has suffered years of abuse. She is going to tell you about the destructive pattern of violence and regret. You will also hear from Dana McGuire, an expert in the field of behavioral psychology and domestic abuse. Dr. McGuire will help us understand what years of abuse inflicts on a person, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically. The prosecution wants you to believe that this is a simple case. They will argue that Mrs. Barrett pulled the trigger with means of murder. The reality is the tragic events of this terrible night cannot be murder. They are a painful result of years of abuse that had come to a destructive breaking point. And as you see the story unfold, I am convinced that you will see not one victim, but two. It will be clear that Mrs. Barrett did not murder her husband. She never gave up hope that she could have a happy marriage, but years of abuse and trauma collapsed on top of her, and suddenly that hope was crushed. Mrs. Barrett does not need to be convicted of murder. She needs help. She needs counseling, and she needs to heal. She needs to be found not guilty. Thank you.
At this time, we'll proceed into evidence. Prosecution, you may call your first witness.
We call Joe May to the witness stand.
Counsel, you may proceed.
Please state your name.
My name is Joe May.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a pathologist at Haydenfield General Hospital.
Could you please state the credentials that would make you an expert?
Certainly. I'm a pathologist, a medical doctor, and I am employed by the county police department.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to ask you to treat this witness as an expert witness.
Anything from the defense? Granted.
What was the name of the deceased,
John Walker Barrett.
and how old was Mr. Barrett?
He was 48 at the time of death.
Which bullet was the cause of death?
The one to the back of the head.
Could you describe this wound to me?
Certainly. When the bullet entered, it shattered his skull and was shot at an angle that extended through the skin and was about 5 centimeters long. I found 2 pieces of bullet in his brain.
And did the body suffer from any additional gunshot wounds?
Yes, there were 4 additional gunshot wounds.
And could you please describe these to me?
There was 1 to the upper part of the left arm, 2 to the back, just right of the spinal cord, and 1 to the right of his thigh. There were no powder marks visible.
And what does the absence of powder marks indicate?
That the target was more than 2 feet away.
Lastly, Ms. May, is it possible to determine in which order these shots were fired in?
No, it is impossible.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Defense, you may proceed with your cross-examination.
So you mentioned that the shots are not determined, or you can't determine what order the shots were fired in. Does this mean that the shots not to the head could have come before the shot to the head, or any other random order?
Could you repeat the question?
With absence of information determining the order of shots, does that mean any order whatsoever could be consistent with the facts?
I think yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Any further questions? Witness, you may step down. State, you may call your next witness.
Call Cheney to stand. How are you today?
Good.
Good.
CM Cheney, South Bend College, Criminal Justice. I am a police officer with the Milton County Police Department.
Defense, any objection? Granted.
$1982. I'm sorry, what? I am also a security guard at the First Bank and Trust Company. I am trained to be a radio patrol response officer.
Okay. Oh, hello. So your experience in investigating crime scenes,
Yes.
is this your first time to respond to a homicide?
No.
Okay. Based on the evidence you found and the testimony given, what can you say happened that night?
The deceased came home at around 9 p.m. and he declared that he wanted a divorce, and he said that he would move out the next day. After finding out that his wife knew the evidence, she had found the letter, he was very unhappy, and they argued about it, and she said that he would be sorry, and she took her gun out and she shot at him 6 times.
Okay. What time did you receive the dispatch to go to that address?
9:50 p.m.
Okay. When did you arrive at the scene?
9:57 p.m.
Who was the reportee?
Lee Porter, the housekeeper.
Did he give a statement?
Yes, he did give a statement to Detective Johnson and Hall at the station.
Okay. What did you see? What substantial evidence did you see when you got to the scene of the crime?
I saw a male lying face down with 5 bullet wounds.
Okay. Where were those wounds?
The first, or not first shot, there was a bullet wound to the left arm, 1 to the left thigh, 2 to the back, to the right of the spine, and 1 to the back of the head.
Okay. Where was the victim?
The victim was approximately 2 feet from the door leading into the breakfast room with the head facing north.
Okay. Did you make a record of the evidence you found?
Yes, I did.
I would like to admit Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Defense counsel, have you had an opportunity to review the evidence presented? Have you had an opportunity to review that, and do you have any objections to it being admitted as evidence? So admitted.
Good.
Okay. Where did you find blood?
On the couch.
Was the body identified?
Yes.
As who?
John Walker Barrett.
Where was the body?
Approximately, or the head was approximately 2 feet from the door leading to the breakfast room.
Okay. What was his condition of the body?
He had 5 bullet wounds and was very bloody.
Okay. Were there any items in his possession?
Yes, a bloodstained letter from the victim dated December 16th, 1988.
Okay. At this time, I would like to admit Exhibit 4 into evidence.
Would you show defense counsel, and defense counsel, let me know if you have any objections, please. Admitted.
Would you please read aloud the letter for the jury?
Okay. My dearest Tootsie, you'll never know how much your love means to me. The first time I saw you in court, I knew I couldn't live without you. All these years being married to Barbara have been a living hell for me. As you know, Barbara is really a fine person, but her possessiveness and her drug habits have become a burden I can no longer bear. I have tried all these years to keep it from our friends, but I can try no longer. Please do not think that you have stolen me away from her. Our marriage has been dead for a long time, and I do not wish her ill. I just cannot live without you, my wonderful child. And to think that I could have spent the rest of my days in that unhappy marriage had I not met you. I realize that I am older than you by many years, but for the years I have left, I wish to be your husband. Perhaps you will not think me foolish to say that soon we could have children, the ones that I have so desperately wanted for so many years, but which Barbara could not have. We could be so happy together. Although this may sound overly sentimental, I have shown you a side to me which few people ever see. I love you with my whole being, my darling, as I have never loved before. Please say you'll wait for me, and I will tell Barbara soon. And I will mail this as soon as I find a stamp. All my love, John.
Was there any weapon found at the scene?
Yes, a gun.
What type of gun?
A .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol.
Okay. How many rounds fit into one of those guns?
6 rounds, and there were 6 spent rounds or cases of .38 caliber ammo at the scene.
Did you locate Mrs. Barrett when you arrived?
Yes.
Where was she?
She had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom.
How did you get her out of the bathroom?
I threatened to break down the door, and she opened the door and collapsed to the floor.
Did Mrs. Barrett say anything to you after she was revived?
She said, "I didn't mean to hurt John. I loved him so. Why did he have to hurt me? And why did he have to leave?"
Okay. Can you verify that this woman is the one who was at the crime?
Yes.
Did you document the events of that night?
Yes, I did.
At this time, I would like to admit Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Would you show defense counsel, please? Any objection? Admitted.
Okay. Who was the suspect?
Barbara Allen Barrett?
Was she taken into custody at the scene?
Yes.
What did Lee Porter report?
Lee Porter reported that the deceased came home at around 9 p.m. and he stated that he declared that he wanted a divorce and would move out the next day. And then Barbara had brought up that she found the letter, and they argued about it, and then they took it into the living room, and they argued about it some more, and then there were gunshots heard.
Okay. Mr. Cheney, from the evidence you found and testimony of the witnesses, what happened that night?
After Mrs. Barrett got her gun out, after arguing for quite some time, she got her gun out and shot him once in the left arm, once in the left thigh. Attempted to shoot at him but missed a third time, and then, we don't know the order, and then 2 more shots to the right of the spine and 1 to the back of the head.
That was 6 shots fired, correct?
Yes.
No more questions. Thank you.
Defense counsel, you may proceed.
You seem very certain about the facts, and it's a great interpretation. In fact, it's in a lot of detail. How much of it did you actually get from the house?
I'm sorry, could you restate it another way?
How much of the inference did you get from the evidence at the house?
I got the nervousness from Mrs. Barrett. She had locked herself in the bathroom. Clearly she wouldn't do that for no reason. And the bullet wounds, it would have had to have been by someone else because he couldn't, Mr. Barrett could not have done that himself by where the bullet wounds were. And the letter evidence, those were all things that I witnessed by myself without the help of others.
Okay, so also in this next section that I highlighted for you to read, can you read that on there? The highlighted section, could you read that?
It's a little blurry.
Sorry.
You may approach the witness.
Okay. According to the housekeeper, Lee Porter, the deceased and the actor had an argument in the living room and then went into the dining room to eat dinner. During dinner, Porter heard the deceased say that he still wanted the divorce and that he was glad she knew everything. The actor left the dining room and the deceased followed. Prior to leaving the dining room, the actor said that the deceased would be sorry for his actions. From the placement of the blood stains, it is probable that the deceased and the actor quarreled further over the contents of the letter, and the actor got her gun and shot the deceased in the left arm as she sat on the sofa, or as he sat on the sofa.
Okay. Sounds like you got most of that from Porter's testimony to you. Is that true?
I could see, when I got there, I could see the bullet wounds on where they were. I did look over Porter's statement, but no, most of my evidence was not from Porter's.
Okay. Is it also possible for other scenarios to be consistent, given that the evidence what? Never mind. Your Honor, no further questions.
You may be seated. This witness may be excused.
Can I?
Prosecution, you may call your third witness.
Honor, I would like to call Lee Porter to stand.
You may
Please,
proceed.
sorry. Please state your name.
Lee Porter.
How long have you been working for the Barretts?
Around 6 months.
What are your work times?
From 2 p.m. to 10 p.m.
What days of the week do you work?
Wednesday to Sunday.
Have you ever heard Mr. and Mrs. Barrett fight?
One time up in their bedroom.
Have you ever seen bruises on Barbara Barrett?
No, but I wasn't really looking.
When were the two separate times that you saw a gun in Barbara Barrett's hand?
One time on the day of the death. Earlier that day, I saw Barbara Barrett come in through a private door in the kitchen with a gun in her hand. And then the other time, night of, John came in through the dining room, and Barbara followed after with a gun.
Can you please describe the noises that you heard the two separate times?
It sounded like a car backfiring.
Okay. So the two noises were the same?
Yes.
Did you hear Barbara Barrett say that John Barrett would be sorry?
Yes.
And had Barbara Barrett drank any wine before saying that?
Yes. Can you please restate the question?
Had Barbara Barrett drank any wine before saying that John
Oh,
Barrett
no,
would be sorry?
not before.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense counsel, you may proceed with your cross-examination.
So, did you enjoy working for the Barretts?
Sure.
Was the pay well?
Counsel is asking a question that the witness has not stated.
Has not what? I'm sorry.
It's not.
It's just a question.
But he can't.
Counselor, let her make her objection. Can you repeat the last word? I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
Objection. Counsel is asking for the witness to give an answer for which he or she is not qualified.
In what ways is he not
It
qualified?
wasn't. It's not in the statement.
Any response?
It's just a question. It doesn't necessarily.
Is there any relevance to this?
Is your objection relevance as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Any relevance?
Your Honor.
Response?
Yes, it is. Well, he was seen stealing from them. So it was just my question is why.
Counselor,
the
let
day
me
was-
rule on the objection first. Okay. I'm overruling your objection unless this becomes a material fact that he does not have knowledge of. Proceed.
So then why would you steal from them?
I cannot answer that question.
You cannot answer the question?
I did not steal from the Barretts.
Then Mrs. Barrett has seen you steal from them. It's in her statements.
Okay.
And so, in fact, this isn't the first time you've committed a crime. Is it, Mr. Porter?
No.
You've petty larceny, correct?
Restate your question
Petty larceny, correct?
one more time.
So it was petty larceny, correct?
One more time.
She's saying it's petty larceny. Were you charged with petty larceny?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence Exhibit 12.
Has the prosecution had a chance to review the exhibit? Admitted.
So, Mr. Porter, can you identify what this is, please?
Do you need her to show you the document?
Yes.
You may approach.
The final disposition of the Superior Court.
And what does the plea say? What is the plea?
Guilty.
Guilty. So, were you aware that when you pled guilty, that it would account to your moral turpitude, which would render your testimony unworthy of belief?
Please restate that question.
Did you know that when you pled guilty, it would account to your moral turpitude, which would render your testimony unworthy of belief?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
This witness may step down. Any further witnesses from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution rest?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Defense counsel, you may call your first witness.
I would like to call Barbara Allen Barrett to the stand, please.
And counselor, if you can speak up just a little bit. You may proceed.
Will you please state your name for the court?
I am Barbara Allen Barrett.
What is your relationship with the deceased?
We have been married for 10 years.
How did you both meet?
John and I met at an alumni function for Vassar College. His sister, Hildy, suggested that he go with me.
Did you notice any concerning behavior at the function?
Yes, when we went outside to get a breath of fresh air, I noticed that he had been drinking, and he began to push the limits of our acquaintance in the sense of getting handsy.
Okay. Did you continue your friendship after that incident?
Yes, after that, he apologized numerous times, and I could feel that he was really being genuine. So yes, we began to date, and we saw each other every day for about 6 months.
Okay, and how did your relationship progress from there?
We were engaged.
Did any other incidents happen before your marriage?
A few weeks before the wedding, John came to my house after his work, and I could tell he had been drinking, and he asked me to make him a drink, and I purposefully made it weak. I gave it to him, and he tasted it and immediately threw it against the wall. He started yelling at me, and when I tried to defend myself, it just only made him even more mad. Sooner or later, he just reached his highest point and threw me against the wall and slapped me in the face. He realized what he had done and started to cry, and we were both completely shocked. As soon as it started, it had ended, and I saw the real, loving, compassionate John.
How did your relationship progress from there?
We went on with the wedding.
Okay. Did he ever, just a second, sorry. Why did you continue your relationship with him?
I could see that he really needed me.
And is that why you stayed with him?
Yes.
Did any other incidents happen after your marriage?
A few weeks after we were married, I had discovered that he had been cheating on me, and when I told him, he called me a bad wife, and he began to hit me and kick me.
Did you ever consider seeking help?
Numerous times, yes. I went to my doctor, the police, and my pastor.
Did any of them give you any help?
Not really. They just encouraged me to try to make John happier.
Okay. Why didn't you leave after that?
He apologized a lot, and he told me that there wouldn't be any more incidents, so I believed him.
Okay. Did any of these incidents ever send you to the hospital?
Yes. When I mentioned about him calling me a bad wife and hitting me and kicking me, I went to the hospital, yes.
Did you get any help after that?
No.
Did any of these incidents happen again?
The beatings happened about 3 to 4 times a year. Yeah, one day he'd be fine, and then the next day he would be trying to hurt me.
He continued to hit you?
Yes.
With his fists?
Yes.
Did he ever hit you with anything else?
With his belt, sometimes.
And is that what he used last night?
Yes, that is what he used last night.
Do you remember anything after John came in with his belt?
Not a lot at all. I remember Officer Cheney knocking on my door and telling me to open up, and I looked around and realized I was in the bathroom.
You locked yourself in a bathroom?
Yeah, I guess I had.
Mrs. Barrett, why on earth would you lock the door?
I don't know. I just remember John being mad, and I was scared, and I knew that John would be upset at me.
Mrs. Barrett, what made that night different than other nights?
John came home and told me that he wanted a divorce. So, yeah.
How did that make you feel?
I was distraught. I was completely upset and felt horrible.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Prosecution, you may proceed with your cross-examination. Defense counsel, we're doing cross-examination first. Yeah. You're fine.
Hello, Mrs. Barrett. How are you doing well?
Yes.
That night at the Vassar alumni event, you stated after some alone time together with John, he pushed you down and started getting fresh with you, correct?
Yes.
Do you agree that getting fresh with a woman without consent is considered very inappropriate, disrespectful, and could even equate to harassment?
I do.
And then 2 days later, after this incident, you agreed to meet up with him, a man who made you feel uncomfortable by harassing you?
Yes.
Yes. Do you agree that getting fresh with a woman without consent is considered very inappropriate, disrespectful, and could even equate to harassment?
I do.
And then 2 days later, after this incident, you agreed to meet up with him, a man who made you feel uncomfortable by harassing you?
Yes.
In your witness statement, you mentioned seeing him for 6 months, correct?
Hmm?
Then he proposed, and
Yes.
however, 2 weeks prior to your wedding, a drunken John came to your house, slapped you in the face, and shoved you hard against the wall. Is that true?
Yes.
Do you consider this abusive behavior?
Yes, I do.
So you knowingly married an abusive man that you only knew for 6 months, and quote, I quote from your witness statement, he needed you, correct?
Yes.
Do you consider John to have been a handsome man?
Yes.
Were you ever concerned about John's physical attraction to other women?
Yes.
Thank you. Was John ever unfaithful?
Yes. One night.
Yes or no answers, please.
Yes.
So, and then the incident he was unfaithful was 8 months after your wedding. You walked into his office and you caught him with a blonde woman, correct?
Yes.
Did this anger you?
Yes.
Then you immediately ran home after seeing him with this blonde, correct?
Yes.
Was your husband an attorney that practiced criminal law?
Yes, he was.
Did he have any clients?
Yes.
Has he ever had a blonde client?
Yes, he has.
And then when John arrived home 2 whole hours later, you claimed he repeatedly hit you with his fist so hard that you fell on the ground, and then he began to kick you until you were left unconscious, correct?
Yes.
The next thing you remember is waking up in an ambulance, right?
Yes.
Did you tell the medical professionals at the hospital that you had fallen down the stairs?
Yes, I had.
Was that a lie?
Yes.
But in your witness statement, you said that you sought help to deal with this violence, correct?
That's correct.
Who did you seek help from?
Doctors, police, and my pastor.
But wait, aren't doctors medical professionals?
Yes.
Did one of these medical professionals or doctors prescribe you tranquilizers?
No.
Okay. Were you prescribed tranquilizers?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Did the beatings continue?
Yes, they did.
Were the beatings so bad that they left bruises?
Yes.
Did either of your housekeepers notice your bruises?
I don't know.
Do your housekeepers work inside the house?
Yes, they do.
On December 18th, 1988, did your husband come home sober and tell you that he wanted a divorce?
Yes, he did.
In your witness statement, you stated that on that faithful night of your beloved's death, that you don't remember anything after your husband coming into the room with a belt, right?
That's correct.
It is recorded in Officer Cheney's police report that you said, quote, I didn't mean to hurt John. Did you say this?
Yes, I did.
So you do remember hurting your husband, otherwise you wouldn't have said, I didn't mean to hurt John.
Correct.
So you did hurt your husband?
Yes.
Okay, also on the night of your husband's murder, you said, I couldn't live without him, correct?
Correct.
So you were basically saying you can't live without an unfaithful husband who constantly hit, kicked, slapped, shoved, and slammed you against the wall so aggressively that you couldn't leave your own house, and once even had to go to the hospital?
Yes.
Barbara, did any of the medical professionals you visited before diagnose you with battered woman syndrome?
Yes.
They did?
Yeah.
I thought it wasn't Dana McGuire the one who diagnosed you with battered woman syndrome?
Oh, excuse me. Yes, that was her.
2 weeks after John's death, you finally found your psychologist, Dana McGuire, who was the one who diagnosed you with battered woman syndrome.
Yes.
Don't you think that timing of diagnosing is a little odd? Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
This witness may step down. Defense, you may call your second witness.
Thank you for your testimony in this important trial. Would you please state your full name for the court?
My name is Dr. Dana McGuire.
Can you please tell us about your occupation?
I'm a practicing psychologist who specializes in dealing with abused and battered women.
Could you tell us about the training that prepared you for this occupation?
I received my Bachelor of Arts from Campbell State University, graduating with highest honors. My major field of study was in psychology. I also received my master's in psychology, where my emphasis was on sociological and psychological dysfunction within the family structure. My thesis was entitled Passive Behavior and Learned Helplessness in Interfamilial Relationships.
How long have you been practicing psychology?
For 17 years.
What have you been doing that time, like interviewing?
I have
Studying.
interviewed over 300 beaten and abused women. I have also listened to about 500 stories concerning this subject.
Have you had any other experience in court?
Yes, I have testified in several trials concerning abused and battered women. The court has appointed me as an expert witness on several occasions.
At this time, Your Honor, may I have permission to treat this witness as an expert?
Any objection from the prosecution? Granted.
Thank you. In your expert opinion, how would you define a battered woman?
A battered woman is any woman who is subject to forceful behavior from a man against her will. To be classified as a battering couple, the couple must go through at least 2 cycles, which consist of 3 phases.
Can you elaborate on those cycles of abuse?
The first phase is labeled the initial phase. During this time, tensions rise and the man abuses the woman minor, such as in verbal or physical abuse. The man's guilt increases due to his lack of control. The second phase is called the acute battering phase. During this time, the man's uncontrollable tension leads to massive physical and psychological destructiveness. The woman often believes the battering is her fault, and this phase can last anywhere from hours to days. The third phase is called the loving phase. This phase consists of contrite behavior on the account of the man. The man attempts to atone for his previous behavior, but secretly believes that he has taught the woman a lesson and will have no need to batter her in the future. The woman also believes that the battering is her fault. She feels like she did something to hurt the man in order that's why he beat her. These phases repeat each other over and over until this couple either separates or kills each other.
Well, why would a battering woman or a beaten woman stay in such an abusive relationship?
The psychological dependency is enormous. It is very hard to reject. The woman also believes that the man needs her, that the man will just go completely insane without her. And there is often no economical or legal choice.
Can you describe the symptoms of women who are repeatedly battered?
They tend to have severe stress and severe depression. A lot of times they have increased anger on themselves and suffer a wide range of physical and mental symptoms. They tend to deny reality much like a soldier in battle. They often have a severely diminished perception of pain and are impervious to death, like impervious to the idea of death and pain. For example, a woman that I once interviewed had shot her husband 4 times in the back of the head, yet honestly believed that she would survive, that her husband would survive, that his wounds were not fatal.
Have you ever had the opportunity to interview Miss Barrett?
Yes, I have, for 3 times.
So, what did you cover in those interviews?
She just told me about her story and about what she had been going through for the past 10 years.
Based on those interviews, how would you describe Miss Barrett's situation in their relationship?
Miss Barrett's situation was a classic case of battered wife syndrome. She suffered years of abuse for many years. She suffered abuse for many years, yet could not break free. She had severe stress because of extreme dependency, but at that point, breaking free from her marriage would have been just as easy as severing her right arm.
In your expert opinion, how would you describe Miss Barrett's physical and mental state during the night of her husband's death?
When her husband told her he was leaving, it unleashed the floodgate of hurt, pain, and rejection. The reality of the abuse was finally made clear to her. She saw her husband as he was, a man capable of causing death and injury. It was a tragic end to a tragic marriage.
Does this seem very planned, like she had this all along and she just waited for an opportunity?
No, because when her husband said that he wanted a divorce, everything she had been suffering over those years, that was the last straw, and she broke down. She didn't know what she was doing and brought her hurt out on him.
Well, thank you. Your Honor, no more questions.
Prosecution, you may proceed with your cross-examination.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Thank you for being here. That I'm inquire. Your thesis's title includes learned helplessness, correct?
Excuse me?
Your thesis's title includes learned helplessness, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Learned helplessness is implied into your definition of battered woman syndrome, right?
Not exactly.
But it's in your title of the thesis, right?
Yes.
So then it would be implied, right?
Yes, I guess.
Okay. In your witness statement, you referred to your example of dogs and electrical shock in your theory of learned helplessness, right?
Yes, I do.
In addition, you also did say that at first the dogs in the experiment tried to escape the shocks through voluntary movement, but after that failed, they became passive and ceased any voluntary activities, right?
Yes.
If you're implying that these dogs in the experiment relate to battered women, then according to the experiment, the battered women, like the dogs, would have ceased any and all voluntary activities, right?
Yes.
Reiterating your example, the dogs in relation to battered women became passive after being electrically shocked, right?
Yes.
Since the dogs who you are relating to battered women became passive, they would not defend themselves, right? Because the dogs became passive, the dogs wouldn't defend themselves, right?
Not really.
Yes or no, please. Would they defend themselves or not? Because they're
No.
passive. Okay. So according to your previous answer and what you just said, self-defense would be out of the picture because relating battered women to dogs.
Yes.
Okay. You consider Barbara Barrett as a battered woman, right?
Yes.
Since earlier you stated that Barbara Barrett was a battered woman, Barbara Barrett being battered would have ceased all voluntary activities, just like the example of the dogs, right?
Yes.
Then how was it that the battered Barbara Barrett voluntarily defended herself on the night of December 18, 1988?
As I said in my when I was testifying, when he told her he was leaving, she broke down and didn't really know what she was doing.
But actually, you just said that self-defense would be out of the picture.
Yes.
So then she wouldn't defend herself. And so then how did that happen that John Barrett died?
Wait, excuse me?
How would John Barrett have died if she would be passive and wouldn't have?
She was passive for as long as she could. She couldn't handle it anymore.
Thank you. In your statement, you mentioned that when John Barrett told Barbara Barrett that he was leaving her, that it unleashed a floodgate of fury that had built up for years. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
You also said that Barbara Barrett saw it as a betrayal when he planned to leave her, right?
Yes, I did.
You also did say that she could no more have controlled her actions on the night that she killed than she could have controlled the rising of the sun, right?
Yes.
If Barbara Barrett saw this as a betrayal, then why would Barbara Barrett wait through an argument about the divorce, sit down to her dinner, and adjourn to the living room, continuing the conversation with such control? I thought you said she couldn't control her actions.
She tried to control it for as long as she could, and she tried to convince John to not carry on with the divorce, but when he didn't, she collapsed.
No further questions, Your Honor.
This witness may step down. Defense, do you rest? Then you may proceed with your closing argument.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Thank you for listening to this difficult case. Nobody wants to hear these kinds of stories of tragedy and hurt. This is a story of a hurt and broken woman who finally came to terms with the fact that her husband was dangerous. She sought out help not from just one, but 4 different professionals who should have come to her aid. First, she went to her pastor for counsel and help. Then, still without hope for change, she sought out 2 doctors. Finally, she went to a police officer who is sworn to protect and serve. But sadly, none of these people were willing to stop and help this hurting woman. These are not the actions of premeditation, but a desperate woman crying out for help. As we showed through Dr. Dana McGuire's testimony, Mrs. Barrett was stuck in a cycle of abuse. According to her testimony, the abuse victim, Mrs. Barrett in this case, has a detached view of reality and the consequences of her actions. The stress of 10 years of an unhealthy relationship and the added weight that her husband was planning to leave her, despite her faithful attempts to remain with him, was more than her fragile mind could handle. Mrs. Barrett, not understanding the weight of what she was doing, shot her husband in an act of self-protection as he came toward her with a weapon in hand. This scenario was familiar to her, and she knew what to expect next. But this time, she did not play the helpless victim as she had on so many previous occasions. Fearing for her life, she reached for her gun and shot him, and kept shooting, numb with fear. Mrs. Barrett may be guilty of shooting her husband, but she is not the revengeful, scheming woman the prosecution has tried to paint. Mrs. Barrett is clearly in no emotional or physical state to plan and execute the killing of her husband. The only eyewitness the prosecution has brought forward, Lee Porter, only saw Mrs. Barrett with the gun and did not actually see her shoot her husband. Additionally, Porter has motive to lie because he was caught stealing money from the Barrett's drawers. Ultimately, we cannot consider Porter's testimony because he is morally untrustworthy. Murder is defined by the law as the killing of another person with malice aforethought. The prosecution has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mrs. Barrett premeditated the killing of her husband. The evidence has shown that Mrs. Barrett was a victim stuck in a cycle of abuse with a man who is capable of physical harm and in fact sent her to the hospital on many occasions. The defense has shown Mrs. Barrett is too emotionally battered and abused to plan out the killing of her husband. All of this evidence, seeking out professional help, emotional dysfunction, an untrustworthy eyewitness, and the lack of premeditated planning points to a woman not guilty of murder. This is a tragic situation of a woman stuck in an abusive relationship, crying out for help and no one coming to her aid. Mrs. Barrett needs time to heal and be properly helped, not locked away in a prison. The defendant cannot justly be convicted of murder. We can never give Mrs. Barbara Barrett her happily ever after, but we can give her justice. Thank you for your time.
State, you may proceed with your closing argument.
Your Honor, and members of the jury, today you've heard a story about a woman who took justice into her own hands. Although the Barretts had a troubled marriage, the physical abuse that Barbara describes is questionable. What we do know is that John Barrett was found dead with a letter the night of the murder, a letter that describes his intentions to leave Barbara. In the letter, he described how he had had enough of her drug abuse and was planning on leaving her. Barbara confirms in her witness statement that she had been prescribed tranquilizers by a doctor, but perhaps it was due to another woman in John's life. I propose to you that Barbara Barrett wanted revenge, which is where the murder of her husband, John Walker Barrett, comes in. There is a difference between self-defense and murder. According to the South Carolina State Statute number 16-3-10, murder is defined as a killing of another person with malice aforethought, either expressed or implied. On the night of December 18, 1988, John Barrett was brutally murdered by his wife, Barbara Barrett. What would drive a person to commit such a crime? Barbara claims that she was abused regularly for over 10 years by Mr. Barrett, yet the housekeeper, Lee Porter, who works among Mrs. Barrett for the majority of the week, never saw a bruise on Mrs. Barrett. And also, if what Mrs. Barrett says is true, how she tried to seek help from a minister, doctors, and police, yet each one dismissed her, wouldn't it seem logical that at least one of these 3 people would direct her to seeking professional help? But that was not the case. Dana McGuire testified how she had interviewed Barbara Barrett 3 times after the murder, and how her husband's cruelty drove her to killing Mr. Barrett. She also testified how she believes that Mrs. Barrett had a classic case of battered woman syndrome, and out of fear, she shot the gun. But that gun was not just shot once, twice, or even 3 times. It was shot 6 times by someone who clearly had a motive to murder her husband. Mrs. Barrett was extremely upset after being told that Mr. Barrett wanted a divorce and wanted to marry someone else. The Tootsie letter was just one more piece of evidence that pointed to Mrs. Barrett's intentions for murder. Officer Cheney stated in his police report, who fulfilled his duties on the night of December 18, 1988, and was dispatched to the scene of the crime at 2473 Rambling Woods Drive. He observed the crime scene and prepared a police report, then took Mrs. Barrett into custody and brought her to the police station, which is where he obtained the statement from her, which she signed in front of him. Jo May has also testified to her findings. Although the order of shots are not possible to be known based on the diagram of the body and the record of medical examiner signed by Jo May, it is clear that 6 shots were fired. 5 of those shots hit the body, while the other hit the wall, and the bullet to the head is what killed Mr. Barrett. Mrs. Barrett knew what she was doing. As Lee Porter testified that he heard a backfiring noise that night, Porter came into the dining room to see Mr. Barrett limping. Obviously, the shot to the head had not yet been fired. But if Barbara Barrett only wanted to defend herself, Mr. Barrett was already wounded, so why didn't she stop? Members of the jury, I asked you to find Barbara Barrett guilty of the murder of her husband. She stated in her witness statement that she didn't remember anything, yet in Cheney's police report she also stated that she didn't mean to hurt John. This was just confirmation of Barbara Barrett not only hurt her husband, but also murdered him as well. Although she may have felt a slight bit of guilt, it was too late. This cannot be changed. Her husband was already and is dead. And the prosecution has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, is guilty of the murder of John Walker Barrett. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. At this time, the trial has concluded and the jury is released to deliberate. Do we clap?
Okay, well, thank you for attending round 1 of our mock trial event. At this time, we will take a 20-minute intermission. During this time, teams can get set up for round 2. Judge and jury will deliberate, and we will meet back in here at 12:35. I ask that you continue to observe protocol with refraining discussion between teams and audience. Thank you. Okay, before we get started with round 2, we have a few lost and found items. There was a cell phone found in the ladies' room. If it does not belong to somebody in here, if anybody's asking about it, there's the owner. Okay. And I think a portfolio was left underneath the table here. So if anybody's looking, I will have it with me. All right, well, welcome back. Thank you for joining us for round 2 of our mock trial event. For round 2, we will have Bulverde acting as prosecution and Universal City acting as defense for our mock trial of, it's a long title, so I want to make sure I get it right, the State of South Carolina versus Barbara Allen Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. At this time, I'll call the State of South Carolina versus Barbara Allen Barrett for trial. Defendant, please rise. At this time, do you have a plea?
Not guilty.
Thank you. You may be seated. Are there any pretrial motions from either side? If there are no pretrial motions to be heard, then we'll proceed. Prosecution, are you prepared to give your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Elizabeth Boyle, and these are my co-counsels, Madeline Thompson and Addison Grenins. We like to think of marriage as a happy, joy-filled time of two people loving life together. Admittedly, that was not the case in the Barrett household. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The question is, what happens next? When someone is in a hard, painful situation, what are they supposed to do? Those in these situations have resources, people they can go to, questions they ask. There are organizations designed to help people in these situations. These options exist because there is one option that does not exist. Under no circumstance is it right to take revenge on those who hurt you. We are a nation of laws and cannot take those laws into our own hands vengefully, and in extreme malice take the life of others. Today you're going to hear about the events that occurred on the night of December 18th, 1988, the sad events and the terrible end to an unfortunate marriage. You, the jury, will be asked to make a decision, an important decision on what happened that night. While some facts will be unclear, there will be other facts, important facts, that are undeniable. You will meet the Barrett's housekeeper, Lee Porter, who will testify to what happened that night. Dr. Joe May will testify to the excessive force used against an already helpless man. And finally, Officer Cheney will paint a picture for us about how that chaotic night and how a helpless John Barrett, already wounded, was evidence enough to declare Barbara Barrett guilty of murder. Thank you.
Defense, you may proceed with your opening statement.
May it please the court, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Jacqueline Gallup, and this is my co-counsel, Hannah Dolke. On the night of December 18th, 1988, Barbara Allen Barrett, an honorable wife and mother, was viciously attacked by her adulterous husband. After 10 years of being battered and tormented by this ruthless man, she shot him out of fright and desperation, and to her horror, killed him. Upon her unlawful arrest, she was not read her Miranda rights, and in her historical state was forced to sign a confession. The issue in this case today is whether Miss Barrett acted in self-defense and if her rights were violated while being taken into custody. Dana McGuire, a highly educated psychologist, is an expert on battered women. She will present evidence for you today showing the cycles of a battered woman and what they endure, and which are present in the relationship between Mrs. and Mr. Barrett. You will also see evidence of a tired police officer who failed to remember important details in his police report and who unlawfully detained my client. We ask that you look at this evidence objectively, realizing that Miss Barrett never intended on killing her husband, whom she loved so dearly, and finding the defendant not guilty, relieving her of all charges.
Thank you, Counselor. At this time, the prosecution may call their first witness.
The prosecution calls Lee Portal to the witness stand.
Go ahead and have a seat. He'll swear you.
I do.
You may proceed.
Would you please state your name for the court?
I am Lee Dawson Porter.
So how do you know the Barretts?
I worked as their housekeeper.
And about how long have you worked for them?
Around 6 months.
And what do you work hours at the Barretts?
I work from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., 5 days a week, Wednesdays through Sundays.
That's a lot of hours. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Have you ever thought about how much time you have spent at the Barretts?
Not really.
Have you ever added them up? You don't have a number?
No.
Well, I did, Mr. Portal. Would you believe that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for over 6 months amounts to roughly 1,000 hours?
Yeah, I guess I believe that. I guess there was a lot.
And at any time in those 1,000 hours, did you ever see Mr. Barrett hit Miss Barrett?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever see him mistreat her or abuse her in any way? Did you ever hear him threaten her?
No.
Okay, so let me clarify. What you are saying is that you spent 1,000 hours at the home of this couple and that you never witnessed anything that caused you to think, I should do something or I should report this?
Never witnessed anything like that.
Can you tell me? Interesting. Tell me, Mr. Portal, did you witness anything earlier on the day of the shooting?
Well, earlier the day of the shooting, I was working in the kitchen, and I heard noises that sounded like a car backfiring coming from the backyard. And then several minutes later, I saw Mrs. Barrett come through the back door with a gun in her hand.
Okay. Can you tell me what happened moments before John Barrett's death?
Mr. Barrett was late to come home from work, and Mrs. Barrett was pacing, complaining about how he was never home on time. And then when he got home, they sat down and talked a little bit while I went to finish preparing dinner.
Was there any odd behavior exhibited from either of the Barretts?
Well, when I went back to tell them that dinner was ready, they looked pretty angry at each other.
Did you hear anything when you went in?
No, I only heard things when I went back in to set the table.
What did you hear?
Well, I heard Mr. Barrett say, "I've had it with you, Barbara. Now you know I'm leaving tonight."
And what happened after that?
Mrs. Barrett said, "You can't do this to me," but Mr. Barrett stayed pretty calm for the most part.
And what happened after you heard the gunshots?
They reminded me of the sounds I heard from the backyard, so I walked in and saw Mr. Barrett limping through the living room with the bloody leg.
That must have been unexpected for you. When they were talking in the living room or in the dining room, I forget which one you said, did you hear anything that Miss Barrett might have said that could have hinted at her anger?
She said something like, "You'll be sorry."
No further questions.
Since you may proceed with questioning this witness.
In your witness statement, you mentioned that Mr. Barrett tended to throw things when his dinner was not cooked the way he liked it. Is this true?
Yes.
And other than that, did you ever hear or see any signs of violence with Mr. Barrett?
I heard her scream once after they were arguing.
In your witness statement, you said a lady you used to work for accused you of stealing money from her purse. Is this true?
Yes.
In Mrs. Barrett's statement, she said she caught you stealing loose change from one of Mr. Barrett's drawers. Is this true?
Yes.
So twice you have been accused of stealing, correct?
Correct.
And you denied stealing both of these times, yes?
Yes.
So you have been accused of stealing at least twice. How are we supposed to trust the word of a thief?
I wouldn't say I'm a thief.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
This witness may step down. Prosecution, you may call your second witness.
Prosecution would like to call Joanne May to the stand.
And if you can be sworn in by the bailiff right there before you take your seat. Thank you. You may proceed.
Will you please state your full name for the court?
Dr. Joanne Regina May.
And Miss Joanne, could you tell me what you do?
I'm the medical examiner at South Carolina Law Enforcement in Milton County.
Would you tell the court what a medical examiner does?
I perform autopsies on the deceased, try to determine the cause of death, and report my findings back to law enforcement.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Clemson University and received a doctorate in pathology.
Do you frequently report your findings in court?
Yes, it's part of my job.
Did you perform the autopsy on Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
What did you discover during the autopsy?
I found 5 gunshot wounds, 1 in the leg, 1 in the upper left arm, 2 in the upper back, and 1 in the cranium.
Did you find anything to indicate a weapon used?
Yes, all the bullets seem to be from the gun found at the murder scene.
Can you tell me what appears to be the cause of death?
The shot to the head.
What else can you tell me about the bullets that were fired?
They were fired at a 45-degree angle, which indicates that Mrs. Barrett had to be standing over the body when she shot him.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense, you may proceed.
Is there any way to determine in which order the gunshots were fired?
No.
And how tall was the deceased?
About average height.
I'll refresh your memory. He was 6'2",